At 4:17 a.m. on August 7, 1944, Private First Class Daniel Cooper crouched in a foxhole on Hill 317 near Mortain, France. His commanding officer was Lieutenant Robert Hayes, 26 years old, 8 weeks in combat since D-Day, 0 major defensive stands. German forces were launching Operation Lüttich, a massive counterattack with over 11,000 troops trying to cut off the Allied advance. Cooper had been a reconnaissance scout for 5 months, ever since arriving in England from infantry training. He knew map reading, terrain analysis, position reporting, everything taught at reconnaissance school. But the map he'd been given was wrong. A French military map from 1936 with critical errors. One ridgeline was drawn 400 meters west of its actual position, a seemingly minor cartographic mistake. That error made Hill 317 look like an exposed position with poor defensive value. American commanders had almost abandoned it, pulled back to what the map showed as better ground. But Cooper had walked the terrain, knew the map was wrong, knew Hill 317 dominated the entire valley. He'd tried to tell his superiors. They said maps were made by professionals, trust the map. But Cooper knew that if American forces held Hill 317, they'd control the German retreat route completely. If they abandoned it like the map suggested, 11,000 German troops would escape encirclement. Cooper had done something that violated every regulation. He'd redrawn the tactical map himself, corrected the ridgeline, showed the true defensive value of Hill 317, submitted it to Lieutenant Hayes. Hayes had looked at Cooper's hand-drawn corrections, at the official map, at the terrain, and made a decision that would determine the fate of 11,000 German soldiers. What happened in the next 72 hours would change how the U.S. Army valued ground reconnaissance over cartography. The first major mapping error Cooper discovered was during the advance through the hedgerows in July. His unit was the 30th Infantry Division, 120th Regiment, fighting through brutal bocage country. Cooper's job was reconnaissance, scout ahead, identify enemy positions, report terrain features. He'd been issued French military maps, pre-war cartography, supposed to be accurate. But on July 18th, Cooper's patrol was searching for a reported ford across the Say River. The map showed a shallow crossing point, perfect for vehicles, 3 kilometers south of their position. Cooper's patrol walked to the coordinates, found a steep gorge, no ford. The river was 12 feet deep, completely impassable. The map was wrong, not slightly wrong, completely wrong. Cooper reported back. The battalion commander said Cooper must have misread the coordinates. Sent another patrol. They found the same gorge, same deep water, no ford. The advance was delayed 6 hours, while engineers found an actual crossing point 2 kilometers east. Cooper started questioning the maps. If one feature was wrong, what else was wrong? He began comparing maps to actual terrain, found dozens of discrepancies, small errors mostly. A road shown as paved was actually dirt. A hill marked at 150 meters was actually 180. Minor issues. But in combat, minor issues could mean major casualties. Cooper started keeping his own notes. Corrections to the official maps, actual terrain features. Other scouts thought he was paranoid, said the maps were good enough, close enough. But Cooper had been a surveyor before the war, worked for the county planning department. He understood how mapping errors occurred, how cartographers made assumptions, how terrain changed over time. The French military maps they were using were 8 years old, made before the war. Some features had changed. Forests had been cut, roads had been built, rivers had changed course slightly, and some errors were just mistakes. Cartographers had drawn features in wrong locations. On August 3rd, Cooper's unit reached the outskirts of Mortain, a small town controlling a critical road junction. The town sat in a valley, surrounded by hills, perfect defensive terrain. Cooper was sent to reconnoiter Hill 317, the highest point overlooking Mortain. The official map showed Hill 317 as relatively isolated, with a ridgeline 400 meters to the west. That ridge would block fields of fire westward, make the hill vulnerable to attack from that direction. But when Cooper climbed Hill 317, he realized the map was completely wrong. The ridge wasn't 400 meters west. It was right there, part of the same hill mass. Hill 317 wasn't isolated. It dominated everything. Perfect 360-degree observation. From the summit, Cooper could see 15 kilometers in every direction. Every road, every approach. This wasn't just good defensive terrain. This was the key to the entire sector. Whoever held Hill 317 controlled all movement through Mortain and the surrounding valleys. Cooper took detailed notes, drew sketches, corrected the map showing the actual ridgeline position, returned to Lieutenant Hayes, explained what he'd found, showed his corrected map. Hayes listened, but other officers were skeptical, said the French military maps were professionally made. One PFC with survey experience couldn't override professional cartographers. The battalion commander looked at both maps, the official one, Cooper's hand-drawn corrections. Said Cooper was probably right, but doctrine said to trust official maps unless proven otherwise. They'd position forces based on the official map. Hill 317 would get minimal garrison. Main defensive positions would be on what the map showed as better ground to the east. Cooper tried to argue, said the map was wrong. Hill 317 was critical, they'd regret not holding it properly. The battalion commander said the decision was made. Cooper could note his objection in the log. On August 6th, intelligence reported major German forces concentrating near Mortain. Operation Lüttich was coming, a counterattack designed to cut Allied forces in two. Hitler had personally ordered it, wanted to drive to the coast at Avranches, split the American advance. 11,000 German troops, 4 panzer divisions, heavy tanks, artillery, everything. The attack would come through Mortain. The defenders had maybe 3,000 American troops, outnumbered nearly 4 to 1. On terrain favoring the attackers, Lieutenant Hayes called Cooper in, said they were sending one company to Hill 317, about 120 men, supposed to be a listening post, fall back if attacked. Hayes asked Cooper's honest assessment, was Hill 317 worth defending? Cooper said absolutely, said the map was wrong. Hill 317 was the key to everything. If they abandoned it, the Germans would use it to coordinate their entire attack. If they held it, they could call artillery on every German movement in the valley. Hayes made a decision, said he believed Cooper. They'd defend Hill 317 in strength, 2 companies instead of 1, plus a mortar section, all the heavy weapons they could spare. If Cooper was right, they'd bottle up the German attack. If Cooper was wrong, they'd waste resources. Hayes's career was riding on trusting a PFC's hand-drawn map over official French cartography. On the evening of August 6th, American forces dug in on Hill 317. 240 men, 6 mortars, heavy machine guns, limited anti-tank weapons. Cooper positioned them based on his terrain analysis, not on what the official map showed, placed observation posts on the actual ridgeline, where the map said there was open ground, set up fields of fire covering the actual approaches, not the approaches the map indicated. If the map had been correct, this positioning would have been terrible, exposed, vulnerable. But Cooper's corrections meant they had perfect defensive positions. The German attack started at 2 a.m. on August 7th, massive artillery barrage, then tanks and infantry, 4,000 troops hitting the American lines around Mortain. German forces broke through in several places, were advancing rapidly, but Hill 317 held. The 240 men on that hill could see everything happening below. Cooper was right. The actual ridgeline gave them observation of the entire valley. They started calling in artillery, directing fire on German columns as they advanced. If the defenders had been positioned according to the official map, they couldn't have seen half these targets. The misdrawn ridge would have blocked their view, made Hill 317 nearly useless. But Cooper's corrections meant they had perfect fields of observation and fire. German commanders realized quickly that Hill 317 was a problem, tried to capture it. Sent infantry and tanks up the slopes. The defenders held, beat back 3 assaults. The hill became a fortress, an island of American control in a sea of German forces. For 3 days, Hill 317 was surrounded, cut off, supplied only by airdrops. But those 240 men controlled the German advance, called artillery, directed airstrikes, turned every German movement into a target, because they could see everything. The German retreat route ran right through the valley below Hill 317. When Operation Lüttich failed and German forces tried to withdraw, they couldn't. Hill 317's observers called artillery on every retreat column, blocked every road. 11,000 German troops were trapped, surrounded, forced to surrender. An entire division captured, the largest German loss in the Normandy campaign, all because Hill 317 was held, because Cooper's map corrections were right. What Cooper didn't know during those 3 days was that his map corrections had been sent up the chain. Lieutenant Hayes had submitted Cooper's hand-drawn corrections to battalion, then to regiment, then to division. Senior officers were comparing Cooper's sketches to the official French maps and to actual terrain. Engineers were sent to verify. They surveyed Hill 317 properly. Cooper was right. The ridge line was exactly where he'd drawn it, 400 meters east of the map location. The French military map from 1936 had a significant cartographic error. Not a minor discrepancy, a major mistake that fundamentally changed the terrain's tactical value. Division headquarters started checking other maps, found multiple errors in the French cartography. Some hills misplaced, some roads incorrect, some elevation data wrong. Nothing malicious, just pre-war mapping with limited resources and occasional mistakes. But those mistakes could be fatal in combat, had almost been fatal at Mortain. If Hayes had followed the official map, Hill 317 would have been lightly held. Germans would have captured it easily, used it to coordinate their attack. The American defense would have collapsed. Operation Lüttich might have succeeded. The entire Normandy campaign could have been jeopardized, all because of one misdrawn ridgeline. On August 10th, when Hill 317 was finally relieved, Cooper walked down with the other defenders. Exhausted, low on ammunition, out of food but alive. A colonel from division headquarters was waiting, asked Cooper to explain his map corrections. Cooper showed his notes, his sketches, explained how he'd discovered the error. The colonel said Cooper had prevented a potential disaster, asked if Cooper could check other maps. Cooper said yes, if they gave him time and proper survey equipment. For the rest of August, Cooper was assigned to division headquarters, verifying maps, checking French cartography against actual terrain, making corrections. He found dozens of significant errors, not all as critical as Hill 317, but important. His corrected maps were distributed to all units, marked field verified. Other divisions started doing the same thing, assigning scouts to verify cartography. The concept of ground truth became doctrine. Don't trust maps blindly. Verify terrain personally. All because one PFC had questioned the map and been proven right in the most dramatic way possible. The capture of 11,000 German troops at Mortain was a major victory, made headlines worldwide. The defenders of Hill 317 became famous, the lost battalion of Mortain. But almost nobody knew that the defense had been positioned based on a hand-corrected map, that a cartographic error had almost cost the battle, that one scout's terrain analysis had saved it. Cooper received the Bronze Star for his reconnaissance work. The citation mentioned exceptional attention to terrain analysis. Nothing about map corrections, nothing about proving the cartographers wrong. Lieutenant Hayes received the Silver Star for his decision to defend Hill 317 in strength. The citation credited his tactical judgment despite limited resources. Hayes always said he was just trusting his scout. Cooper saw what the map couldn't show. The German prisoners taken at Mortain told their interrogators they'd been shocked by Hill 317. Their intelligence maps showed it as weakly defended and tactically marginal. They'd expected to capture it easily, use it as an observation post for their own forces. Instead, it became the linchpin of American defense, the position that defeated their entire operation. German officers couldn't understand how Americans had known to defend that specific hill so heavily. They thought it was brilliant intelligence work, intercepted communications, captured plans. It wasn't. It was one surveyor turned soldier who noticed his map was wrong. Daniel Cooper survived the war, returned to civilian life in 1945, went back to his old job at the county planning department, worked as a surveyor and mapper for 35 years, never talked much about his war service. When people asked, he'd say he was in the infantry. Nothing special. In 1984, a military historian researching the Battle of Mortain found references to Cooper's map corrections, found the hand-drawn sketches in archives, compared them to the official French maps, realized the entire defense of Hill 317 had been positioned based on a PFC's corrections to professional cartography. The historian tracked down Cooper. He was 64 years old, still working part-time as a consultant. Asked about the map corrections, Cooper confirmed the story, said it wasn't heroic, just doing his job properly. Maps are tools. Tools can be wrong. Always verify important information. Trust but verify. Basic surveying principles. The historian estimated that Cooper's map corrections prevented a major German breakthrough. If Operation Lüttich had succeeded, the Normandy campaign would have been prolonged. More casualties, delayed liberation of France, possibly changed the war's timeline. Cooper said he'd never thought about it that way, just focused on getting the map right. The principle behind Cooper's discovery influenced military doctrine for decades. The concept of ground truth, that maps are models, not reality. That actual terrain trumps cartography. Modern militaries emphasize reconnaissance over maps. GPS and satellite imagery haven't changed that. Technology is better, but ground reconnaissance remains essential because terrain is complex. Maps simplify, reality is messy. A 400-meter error might seem small on paper, but in combat, 400 meters can mean complete tactical reversal. Life or death, victory or defeat. Cooper understood that, trusted his eyes over the map, convinced his officers to trust him. Robert Hayes, Cooper's platoon leader, survived the war, stayed in the army, retired as a lieutenant colonel in 1968, always credited Cooper with saving the defense of Mortain. Said Cooper taught him to trust enlisted specialists. They often knew more than officers, especially technical specialists like scouts, engineers, and surveyors. Hayes made it policy in his later commands. Always listen to specialists. Verify their concerns. Daniel Cooper died in 2009 at age 89, buried with military honors. His obituary mentioned his surveying career, his war service, his Bronze Star. It did not mention the map corrections, did not mention 11,000 German prisoners, did not mention changing military doctrine. But at his funeral, 8 men attended who'd been on Hill 317 in August 1944. Some were in their 80s, all made the effort. They stood at his grave and saluted, because they knew what history books sometimes missed, that this surveyor saved their lives by questioning a map. One of them gave a brief eulogy, told the story of the map error, how Cooper noticed the ridgeline was wrong, how he convinced officers to trust his corrections, how that decision meant they survived, how 11,000 German troops were captured. Said Cooper taught them that expertise matters, that questioning authority is sometimes necessary. That being right is more important than following procedures. That's who Daniel Cooper was, a surveyor who trusted terrain over cartography and saved thousands of lives by being right. The story of Cooper's map corrections became part of Army reconnaissance training, used as a case study, an example of why ground truth matters more than official documentation. Modern scouts learn about Mortain, about how one PFC's careful observation changed a battle. The lesson isn't just about maps. It's about questioning assumptions, verifying information, trusting trained specialists, even when they contradict official sources. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each one matters. Each one deserves to be remembered. And we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Our community spans from France to America, from veterans to geography enthusiasts. You're part of something special here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.